Hello, this is Arnel Tanyag with Tanyag Company. I'm just doing I call it now my 3-week review of what happened working with business owners and clients over the last couple of weeks. It's been a pretty busy week, so I'm just going to share some tidbits of knowledge and information that you can use if you are a business owner. So one of the things I want to talk about today that no one's talking about, but it works, implement a vacation policy for your business. I find a lot of business owners don't have a vacation policy. And so what happens, there's a couple of things that happen. They either don't take a vacation, and if they do take a vacation, they're at the mercy of their employees because they want their employees to take the vacation first, and they take it. Or I've seen this happen where there's no vacation policy and the key leaders, the key stakeholders, and the owners on vacation, and then there's a, I call a skeleton crew managing the business. I'm like, or leading the business, like, wow. So one of the things you really need to do is implement a vacation policy as early as the business. And the number one person should always take the vacation. Guess is who? Is you. Because the number one thing you need is take care of yourself. So implement a vacation policy. Make sure you're the first one to submit your vacation request in, get that taken care of, then move everyone around you, because you have to be the one that needs to take care of yourself so you have the energy and drive. So no one talks about this, but it works. Implement a vacation policy. The other thing I've noticed too is a lot of business owners are what I call a fire chief. They're putting out fires left and right, left and right, left and right, left and right. There's like fire with employees, fire with staff, fire with software, fire with hiring, fire with collections, fire with AR, fire with something not working really well. So if you're tired of being a fire chief, here's one thing that can change everything. Develop your purpose. And that's not a why, that is what you do overall. Develop your vision. Where do you see the business in the next couple of years? Develop your mission. How do you operate daily? Develop your core values for the business so people know that it's values decision versus whoever feels like is leading at that moment. And then the most important thing is develop a strategic plan for growth, where you have one goal, priorities, strategies, and you have that plan. And then if you have that, then you can align people and processes, systems together, and then everybody knows what's going on in the same page. Everybody knows what's happening. But if you don't have purpose, vision, mission, core values, a strategic plan, typically I know, and I see this a lot, you're a fire chief. And you're just putting out fires left and right, because if you have purpose, vision, core values, a strategic plan, and your plan is focusing on the future, like growing staff, building a development process, getting a CRM, figuring out your marketing, you're going to grow. And you're going to be able to build people into that role, where a lot of times most business owners, especially who are under $1 million in revenue, and sometimes they're between $1.5 million, are still fire chiefs. They're putting out fires left and right. Again, if you want to get tired of being a fire chief, this one thing changes everything: purpose, vision, mission, core values, and a strategic plan that everyone can follow. Very simple. We call it a one-page business plan, or a GPS. And I have got that from the One Thing from Jay Papasan and Gary Keller. It's one of the best tools to use. The one thing that I noticed that can change everything for business owners that actually work on high focus growth is utilize what we call as a productivity tool from the One Thing, again, from Jay Papasan and Gary Keller, called the 401. It's a productivity tool that breaks down your one-page plan, strategic plan, into actual annual goals, monthly goals, and week goals. It's a tracking tool. It's a productivity tool. Because if you're looking to build habits in your business, you really have to track progress. And one of the best ways to track progress is what they call a 401. You track your annual, monthly, and week goals. For example, like if you wanted to improve your relationship with your spouse and significant other, you would start at the beginning of the year, going to have 12 dates, dates with my spouse or my kids. You have it listed out. You have that as your annual goal, and then you break it up monthly and weekly, and you track that. So it makes you remind you what your top 20%. So a lot of the business owners that I focus on high growth, like I have a company in New York that's goal is to do 25% growth this year. They've already completed 5 million. They're looking to do another 5 million. And, I was just talking to the CEO today, and we're working on his 401 for his personal. He wrote a 1-page plan for his personal and a 1-page plan for the business, right? And then I said, okay, let's break that down to your annual goal, monthly goal, weekly goal. And so we're only doing it for the next 6 months for business and that. And then we broke it down. What is your number on Domino? What are we going to track? And it was very helpful because he was like, yeah, there's so much stuff on this paper, Arnel. There's so much stuff. How do you make it simple? How do you pick that one thing that I need to focus on? And we drilled it down. We drilled it down. One for his role as a father, one for his role as a husband, one for his role for taking care of himself. We talked about what's the most important one thing for his business that he needs to focus on first, and everything falls in place. So we spent about an hour talking about that. He got it. I recorded the topic on AI, and he's like, all right, I'm going to put it out there. So that's what he's going to measure. And if you're having high growth, 25% more or higher growth every year, what's your productivity tool? How do you track your annual monthly goals? And the best tool I've seen is the 401. It's the phenomenal tool, but you have to have it in alignment to your 1-page strategic plan or your 1-page business plan. That's the only way to help you stay focused as a business owner if you're working on high growth. Here's another thing. What I've seen is you won't believe what's happened when I've been recommending to clients, when you find vendors who are consultative in their approach in doing business. And what does that mean? They're consultative in your providing a service or product. They are consultants. They ask you your goals, understand your business model, understand operations, understand financial management, understand marketing, sales. How does that all tie in, and does their service product work with you? Like I have a digital marketing company that works in a lot of the residential building for CBBIA, and he actually has, I believe, a 5-step process on how he approaches marketing with a lot of the clients in the home service businesses. He's got a 5-step process, and I suggested to a couple of people I know own trades companies come to the workshop, and they're like, why? Because he has a specific process that allows you, because he looks at it from a consultative standpoint, for more as a consultant than just a salesperson, and understands the holistic part of the business, how sales and marketing, how marketing works, how it ties in sales, how it ties in financial management, how it ties into business development, operations. And he looks at the whole thing and then adds in marketing as part of his component, but makes it all in sync. So when you're looking for a vendor, you want to know, first of all, is their approach consultative, right? Because they're going to ask you a lot about the business, what your goals, your objectives, how do you bring in business, or here's what I do, but not, how does it tie in, right? They're very consultative. And then do they have a specific process? Like for me, when I work with clients, I have a specific process. First thing I do is I create what I call a business owner profile. I have a bunch of assessment tests that talks about their strengths and weaknesses as a business owner. Then we look at the business profile. How does it make money? Do you have an org chart? Does financial management? Do you have accountability? Do you what's your operations looks like? What's your business development look like? How do you do the hiring? So we get all those we get those understanding of that. So I understand it from a consultative standpoint. I understand it. I look at it holistically, and then I say, what do you think you have to achieve the next year? Where are we at? What do we have to do? So that and I said, you have to have a process, because if you don't have a process, then you just have people winging how they feel. And then what happens is you can't logically make a decision because you are relying on that person to tell you. When really, when you're working with somebody who's more have a B2B consultative or a consultative type approach, I believe we work side by side to figure out what's the best solution. Sometimes the best solution isn't me. Sometimes I tell people, you shouldn't hire me. You should take this class, or, you may not be ready, and that's okay. Or sometimes we're like, hey, let's try to figure this out for 3 to 6 months. And if we figure it out, great. If we don't, we give it a shot. So, and I actually have turned down people because I realized that from a consultative standpoint, they feel they need me, but their business isn't ready. There's probably other best resources. So the best thing to do, what you wouldn't believe is, but I tell clients, just find vendors who are consultative in their approach, providing their service and product, and they really understand that they're they understand your business and they're providing you a service or product from a process they have that's logical, that you can follow, so that you're informed, that you work side by side with them, and you can ask questions, you can challenge them a little bit, they can challenge you back and forth, but you come to an agreeable process. When I first started, I didn't have a process, but now I do. I've taken the best processes from best companies and utilize that to help the clients I work with make decisions, not because I assume I know from experience there's a process to follow. Here's one of the things that I think that, if you as a business or have employees or key people who don't listen to you and you want to know how to fix it and you want to make significant changes, one of the things you can do that I see that most people should do is you got to focus on building relationship capital. And that relationship capital, how do you show that you care? Because the reason people don't listen to you, or they are key employees or key stakeholders who don't listen, and they have in the past, is because you are just spending more time asking, what that's withdrawing, and what have you done to keep giving, building that relationship capital, and then show how you care. So, one of the things that, I have one of my clients doing is, okay, who are the relationships in your business that you have to show influence over? You have to influence over, because there's some big major changes over the next 6 months that you have to do. So what are you going to do to build relationship capital? What are you going to do to really support that? And he was like, I never thought about that. I said, have you noticed in the past that when you've done relationship capital activities, like take somebody out to dinner, ask them how the kids are, let's talk about your goals, objectives. When you ask a request, what usually happens? It happens. When you don't do that, what happens? They fight me on everything. I said, so one of the things we had done is we actually have to set up a schedule of the major initiatives for the company, who's going to be leading that, or who's part of that he needs to have relationship capital built in, what activities look like. So we're either going to individualize customize some activities, or we're going to build a standard activity that he can just bring to people. Like, for example, I was telling somebody, like, there's like some, like, what is it, Top Golf or golf simulation places. Just get a membership there, meet people for lunch, meet for coffee, meet with your employees, meet with your staff, your vendors. I have to have people join, like, a country club, and they just have meetings there and events, and you just keep bringing people to that, because it's stationary. Those things work really well, because you can actually have people come to you, and there are some things where you have to individualize, because that's just because how the process is set up, or that's the environment they're in. But the bottom line, you got to build relationship capital, and you got to see and show how you care. And a lot of times people can tell you that, and a lot of times people can't. You just have to do your best to move toward that. The other thing I find out that it's interesting that a lot of leaders don't know the difference between management and leadership. And, and what is that? So, I was talking to a client recently. He serves on a couple boards, and he was saying, I'm a board member, and there was a situation where, the person who's leading it said, they're upset with me because I brought something up to them, and, and then I brought it to the meeting, this and that. And I said, well, I asked him, do you know what the difference between leadership and management? He goes, well, he said, what do you think it is, Arnel? So, well, let me do some research. And this is what I brought up to him. I said, leadership is to influence and empower. Management is to control and execute. So when that person, when you address it to them, when they sit down with you, were they influencing you, empowering you, or they wanted to control you and execute? Were they trying to control or influence? He said they were trying to control. He said, that's interesting. I said, how'd you make it feel? I said, it didn't make me feel good. I said, well, and it's interesting too, is a lot of times with people is they don't know the difference. They think they're leading, but they're really just managing. And then the other thing too, if you're serving and he serves on a board, and he says, what do I do with it? I said, well, that's, it's not an easy question to answer. But I think the first thing you really have to do is know the difference. First of all, what leadership and management is. One's to influence and empower. The other ones is to control and execute. And he said that that's interesting too, because if you look at it, the biggest challenge where most people don't that they struggle with, if you don't know um, about leadership and management, then let me lead into what I see many people in leadership roles now that they don't understand, is that they will, if they're not, there's a habit by Stephen Covey that is called it's the fifth habit, that talks about seek first to understand, then to be understood. So it's a powerful book on the 7 habits of highly effective people, but seek first to understand and then to be understood. And I see many people in leadership roles who don't seek first to understand. They seek to criticize, or they seek to tell. So you think they're seeking to understand, but I can tell the difference when they're seeking to understand, because they ask very good questions. They ask your background. They ask you what you're doing. They don't criticize. But then I find out people really seek to criticize, or they seek to basically tell what you do. And at the end of the day, when I was talking to this client of mine, I said, well, how does it make you feel? Well, it didn't make me feel good. I said, well, what do you, we did some research. I said, well, when you seek to not understand, criticize, or tell, you severely damage relationships, you undermine trust, and ultimately hinder organizational success. It creates fear and uncertainty. Nobody wants to speak up. I mean, I said, at your board meetings, do they have healthy conversations? Do people say, hey, I don't think it's fair? They push back? Or is it just everything's happy-go-lucky, hunky-dory, nothing really says anything, and there's no measurement of success, and it's because, yeah, that's it. I said, ooh. I said, do you run your company like that? He said, no, I don't. I said, how do you feel? I said, I don't know how to navigate this. I said, well, we can work through that, but at least you know the difference, right? And how it can affect morale by decreasing in motivation, how you can see the organization have more crisis and decline. And that's what happens when leaders don't know the difference between management and leadership. And then most importantly, they don't know that, they don't know how to seek to understand. And so that happens a lot. The other thing I've noticed too is, and I can't believe this, and I just saw a recent post on Facebook earlier about this, is they talk about success suicide. It's pretty evident in today's world and the business world on success suicide. So what that basically means is, right before you have a breakthrough to a new level, personal, professionally, you're either going to do 3 things. You're going to sabotage yourself, sabotage by circumstances, or sabotage by other people. So typically, I remember about 15 years ago, I was working with an account executive at a local chamber of commerce, and he wanted to double his income. So we focused solely on a double his income, and then his wife got sick, and he called me and said, Arnel, I think I need to drop out of this double income class because my wife got sick, and I need to spend time with her. I said, well, let me ask you a question. Is do you need the money? He said, yeah. So don't get offended with me, or don't get upset. Do you think dropping out right now will affect your income? Yeah. So what are you going to do about it? I said, I don't know. Do you think you could focus on doubling your income, still take care of your wife, and still support her, pray and support her, and through this sickness she has, and still double your income? He said, I never thought about that. I thought I was just going to go ahead and quit and all that. And he actually made the decision to go ahead and do both. Take care of his wife, double his income. He doubled his income, had the best year ever, and then the following year became the top rep for the company. Because at the point of when he was about to tip over or break through, he was sabotaged. It wasn't sabotage. Sometimes the sabotage isn't yourself. Sometimes things happen where you're at a crossroad. You have to decide. And so we talk about, and I learned that from Michael J. Mayer, the author of Seven Levels of Communication, that you're going to have success suicide. You're going to be sabotaged. And sometimes of it you have control. A lot of times you don't. You just have to decide, do you let it, take you down to another notch, or you learn how to work through it and get to that next level? And that happens more often. The other thing I've noticed, that 90% of business owners are making this simple mistake, and it's interesting. I see this a lot, and I talk about this a lot on my clients, is I said, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to prioritize you. We're like, what do you mean? We're going to make sure that we prioritize your self-care and your personal well-being. So it's a primary driver of the success for your business. It's interesting. If you're not taking care of you and you're not taking care of your well-being and not prioritizing your self-care. So when I advise clients or coach them, it's okay, what are we doing this week to celebrate? What are we doing this week to rest? What are we doing this week to exercise? How's your health? Have you had a annual physical? What does it look like? How you staying in shape? You're walking, you're eating right. What does that look like? Because the number one primary driver of success for your business is how do you prioritize and take care of you? How do you set up those healthy wellness goals? How do you maintain your drive, your personal drive to stay healthy? How do you renew yourself? Because if owning a business, running a business is probably the most difficult part. I think the most difficult part now is not because business was not always hard. I think there's a lot of factors right now we don't have any control over. I think a lot of people are very negative or in survival mode, and we have too much information and access to data that we spend too much on the left side of the brain, not the right side of the brain. We're not calm and relaxed. So you really have to prioritize your self-care, prioritize your well-being. And you do that, that's the primary driver of success, because the more you can take care of yourself, the more you can be fully engaged and fully energized. And so that's where I think a lot of business owners are making the simple mistake is they're not prioritizing their self-care, personal well-being. And if you do that, and I always talk to my clients every day, what are we doing to make sure take care of yourself and taking care of your well-being? Because if you can do that, everything else falls in place. Your strategies and tactics will work. I had a question recently, and they're saying, Arnel, who do you work well with? I said, well, I work with a lot of key leaders who have significant amount of growth in their company. So I have a client right now that in New York that wants to do 25% growth this year. 25% growth. They're about the growth this year. They want to do 10 million in the next year. They want to do 25% of that. So, and I said, wow. I said, why are those companies really great for you to work with? I said, number one, they really need somebody who's a sacred partner, who's part of the inner circle, that knows them, their business, their personality, the dynamics of their team, that can help them navigate through their focus on the priorities of the business, priorities of the personal, how to make it align and focus on growth, how not to lose your soul, and who you are in growing your business. And he said, and those clients, they're very coachable and trainable. They want help. They have, they're either going to have no ego or willing to get rid of the ego because they want that outcome. They want, the time and money. They want the ability to do the things they want to do. And they're very coachable. They're very trainable. Very few owners that I met don't have an ego. A lot of them do. And it's a shame too, because if they got rid of the ego and they really want the outcome they want and really get, the help, from someone like me or someone similar like me, they'll get to there, and some of the clients, a lot of the clients that are best I work with, they love their spouse, significant other, their kids. They want a great life and a great business, and they just don't know how to get there. And they're usually stuck and uncertain. And they just really want to have somebody navigate through that, because, if you got a 25% growth rate every year, that's not only does your business grow, you got to grow. So you got to find somebody who can help you grow you as much as grow your business. And so one of the things that I've done extremely well is built my practice around a very selected group of people who want to grow their business and grow themselves, because they know they got to do both simultaneously. So in my process, I got to get to know the person pretty well. I got to provide the resources to help them grow into that person that can run a $25 million company, that can have processes, system, that can have people who are running train, and then make sure I put them in other resources that help them support that, right? And still be that sacred partner, still be that inner circle, and work with them. Because, some of the clients I work with, I've worked for them years, and they trust me and I trust them, and they know they can ask me a question. I can look at my notes and say, okay, let's do this, let's do that. And they're like, wow, he understands, he really understands how I do and think. That's my goal. That's what I got to do, And so, and I find out that to grow a company with a big goal, you really got to figure out how to hire, develop talent. You got to figure out the time manage. You got to figure out how to let go of your ego. You got to figure out how to inspire and create leaders. I mean, the people skills positive intelligence, emotional intelligence is really important if you really want to grow and scale a business and get out of the day to day. And you got to give up control. You got to give up the ego. And ego, you'd be surprised. Ego shows up in many ways in business owners. So that's probably one of the things I'm going to talk about in my next video is what ego looks like. Because you'd be surprised. And sometimes ego gets in people's ways. And if you're coachable and trainable, you don't have an ego. You don't have an ego that controls you or dictates you. You have the awareness to recognize that ego and make the adjustments. So I hope these tidbits of information was very beneficial for you. So again, thanks for watching. If you have any questions or comments, you can always just DM and I'll respond back. And then thank you again.